So when we're talking about who's first in line with 401k specifically, we're talking about number one, the government created it. So it's a government, pretty much a government product, right? And then it also takes care of the corporation because they can write off the money that they put in, which kind of replaced pensions. And a lot of people in our generation and down, they don't understand even what pensions are, because we weren't around during the pension era, like the days of getting a job, working 30 to 50 years, and then retiring with the company that was going to take care of you for the rest of your life has gone away. It doesn't exist. Actually, now the remaining pensions that are in place, the corporations are squeezing employees out before they can even get their pension so that they don't have to pay the pension. Because now what we've learned through pensions is that it'll absolutely bankrupt the corporation. So when we're talking about who's first in line with the 401k, it's never really the individual is what I hear you saying, right? It's the government, it's the corporation. And again, where are you putting your money and why does it matter, right? And who's first in line? It's not the individual. When we're thinking about like, where did it come from? Because people don't know what they don't know. So now that we've gone down the topic of the 401k, where did it even come from? You said that it was an IRC 401. Like, who produced the 401k? Why did it come about? When did it come about? Is that some stuff you can share?
Yeah, I mean, when you mentioned it a little bit with the pension world of what, you know, my grandparents, as an example, that was that generation, you know, my parents' generation, that exists to a certain extent as well. But things started to change when corporations realized their bottom line was being impacted dramatically by sustaining pensions for their employees. You mentioned a little bit ago, you might have a job for 40 years and you never left. You stayed there because you had that pension, you retired, and next thing you know, you have money to live off of for the rest of your life. You could not outlive that. That's the pension. In the 70s, things started changing a little bit. You know, the steel industry, look what happened. If people have an understanding of what happened to the steel industry in this country, it started to evaporate. That was a huge segment of pensions, a huge amount of workers in this country. You know, you had different rail systems, things like that were just prevalent in those days and earlier. So the pension system, because the employer started to see my bottom line's being affected because of how much I'm putting in to sustain a pension for my employee base. So with that being said, they said, you know what, maybe this doesn't make the most sense. We're going to eliminate pensions and we're going to have the employees figure it out in terms of how do they sustain assets for themselves and build assets for themselves to retire on, to replace the pension system. So in the early 70s, when this all started to kind of change a little bit, of when pensions started to kind of erode, they were still around, obviously, there's still some obviously today, but the onus became on the employee that quickly became, oh my gosh, I need to be almost like a financial expert. I have to build my own pension system because the employers decided we're not doing this anymore. So that's how these plans like the 401ks and stuff became to be, because you had to have some type of system to replace pensions. So it became basically the employee had to figure things out. How do I set money aside? They never had to do this before. Now all of a sudden they're thrown into this. And I think we're starting to see some of that today, and maybe in the last decade or so, of those that are finally retiring on 401ks. And the assets are there, but it's not the same as a pension, because you can outlive these assets, whereas pensions you could not. You could put a joint and survivor on there where your spouse could maintain some type of income from that pension if you predeceased your spouse. These things aren't really there in a 401k and things like that anymore, because you're trying to build, accumulate in hopes that there's enough money there to retire and have longevity. Think about longevity in the world now. People are, longevity, when I say that, the life expectancy is not like it used to be. It's not in the 60s and 70 years of age. People do pass, obviously, but there's people are living into their 90s, well into their 90s, and a lot more people. One of the fastest growing segments of our population are those turning 100 That just wasn't heard of. Well, think about that. You might be retired longer than you worked. So it's really a strain on individuals to accumulate cash in hopes that they don't outlive the money. And that's things that I think is a concern and a fear for people is, do I have enough to retire on? And can this last if I have longevity in my life?